70 years, 7 decades of silence, pain, and memories buried by time. He was sitting in an ordinary armchair at a nursing home in New York, his eyes lost between the yellowed pages of a newspaper. When he looked up, the world stopped. Across the room, walking slowly with the help of a cane, was the face he swore he had lost forever in Auschwitz. The impossible was happening before his eyes. The woman he had loved in his youth, whom he believed had been swallowed by the Holocaust, was alive, and now only a few meters away. His heart raced, his breath grew short, and for a moment he felt like the 18-year-old boy again, dreaming of a future at her side. The newspaper slipped from his hands. He rose slowly, his knees trembling not only with age but with the weight of destiny. 70 years, and there she was. Decades earlier, in Poland, they had been just two teenagers. Life was simple then. The Jewish quarter where they grew up was small, filled with family, friends, and traditions. On weekends, there were dances and festivals, weddings where everyone came together, laughter filling the air. It was during one of those community dances that David first saw Esther. She wore a light blue dress that wasn't fancy, but it made her glow as if she carried her own light. David was nervous, his palms sweaty, his heart beating fast. He had watched her from across the hall for what felt like an eternity before he finally gathered the courage to cross the room and ask her for a dance. When their hands touched, the world disappeared. The music faded into the background. The voices of neighbors and relatives blurred into silence. All he saw was her smile, shy but genuine. All she saw was his determination, the boy who couldn't take his eyes off her. They danced awkwardly at first, but then as if they had always been meant to. That night, their hearts tied themselves together without asking permission. From that moment on, they were inseparable. They met secretly when their parents weren't watching, strolling through the park, whispering dreams under the trees. David talked about opening a bakery someday, a small shop where the scent of bread would fill the streets and support a family. Esther laughed and told him she wanted children, a home filled with music, lullabies, and the traditions of their people. They made plans like any young couple in love, believing that life was wide open in front of them. But the world was changing. The winds of Europe carried hatred in voices on the radio. Posters with poisonous words spread across the walls of towns. Fear crept into their community. Yet David and Esther clung to their love, convincing themselves that somehow they would be safe. Then the war came. By the late 1930s, everything had shifted. German troops marched into Poland, and the Jewish quarter was sealed. Yellow stars appeared on their clothing. Families whispered at night about disappearances, deportations, names that suddenly vanished from neighbors' doors. David and Esther tried to believe they would escape it, that love would shield them, but love alone could not stop soldiers' boots. One freezing night, soldiers banged on their door. Shouting, gun butts striking the walls, families dragged into the street. Chaos. Esther clutched David's hand as they were herded like cattle. At the train station, fear was thick. Screams filled the air. They were shoved into different lines. David reached desperately for her hand. Their fingers brushed, but a soldier's rifle struck him hard, tearing them apart. Esther screamed his name, her voice drowned by the whistle of the train. The doors slammed shut, and darkness swallowed them. In that instant, they believed they would never see each other again. David was sent to Auschwitz, Esther to Bergen-Belsen. Worlds apart, yet both sinking into the same abyss. In Auschwitz, David's days became endless torment. He was stripped of everything, clothes, dignity, even his name, replaced with a number tattooed on his arm. He labored under unbearable conditions, hauling stones, shivering in snow, his body wasting away. But each night when he lay on the wooden planks that passed for a bed, He whispered her name like a prayer, Esther, over and over to keep her alive inside him. He told himself that if he survived, it would be to find her again. Esther's reality in Bergen-Belsen was equally cruel. Hunger gnawed at her until she was little more than skin and bone. Disease spread through the camp, taking lives every day. She grew weak, but inside her was a flicker of memory. David's smile, the touch of his hand, the promise of a future that had once felt certain. She clung to that memory as if it were oxygen. The world tried to break her, but she refused to let go of hope. Years dragged by like nightmares that never ended. Their bodies deteriorated, but their love refused to die. When liberation came, it was like waking from a terrible dream, except the scars proved it had been real. David stumbled out of Auschwitz, barely able to stand. Esther emerged from Bergen-Belsen, weak and sick, but alive. They searched, in shelters, in survivor lists, in whispered rumors. David scanned every name pinned on the walls of makeshift offices, looking for hers. Esther asked in every refugee camp she passed through, hoping for word of him. But their searches ended in silence. David eventually convinced himself that she had not survived. With that grief heavy in his heart, he tried to build a life in the United States. He married, had children, and opened a small bakery. Customers came and went, filling the air with the smell of bread and the chatter of ordinary lives. Yet in the back of his mind, in a drawer hidden from his family, was a faded photograph of Esther. He never spoke of her, but he never let her go. Esther, meanwhile, found her way to Canada. She, too, married and raised children. Her home was filled with laughter and music, yet there were nights when an old song would play on the record player and tears would slip down her face. She told her children she had lost a dear friend in the war, but she never revealed the truth, that the friend had been her first and deepest love. Decades passed. Time marched on. They became parents, then grandparents. They buried spouses, mourned friends, and lived the quiet years of old age. But deep within, each carried the ghost of the other. Then came the final twist of fate. Widowed, frail, and in need of care, David's family placed him in a nursing home in New York. Esther in Montreal lived alone until her children decided she should be closer to them. They arranged for her to move to the United States, to a nursing home they believed would provide comfort and safety. Without knowing it, they sent her straight into the same building where David already lived. On her first day, she entered slowly, leaning on her cane, her eyes filled with uncertainty. And that was the moment David looked up from his chair. His heart pounded as he stared, hardly daring to believe. With trembling steps, he approached her. His voice was weak, but filled with urgency. "What is your name?" he asked. She turned startled. Silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then she said, "My name is Esther." David's breath caught. Tears poured down his face. "Esther, it's me, David." The room froze. Residents and staff stopped in their tracks. Esther's cane slipped from her hand as she gasped. In the next instant, they were in each other's arms, holding on as though the world might tear them apart again. They wept like children, like teenagers reunited on a train platform. 70 years of distance dissolved in seconds. From that day forward, they were inseparable. They walked hand in hand down the hallways of the nursing home, their steps slow but steady. They sat together at every meal, sharing stories, filling in decades of silence. Staff members often paused to watch them, moved by the tenderness in their gestures. Residents whispered that they were witnessing a miracle. Their families, when they visited, were stunned. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered around, listening to the unbelievable story of how love had survived war, separation, and time itself. Some cried, some laughed, all were changed. The nursing home became more than a place of aging. It became the stage of the greatest love story anyone there had ever seen. David and Esther knew they didn't have decades left. Their hair was white, their bodies frail, but every day together was lived with intensity, gratitude, and joy. They had been given what once seemed impossible, a second chance. Their story spread beyond the walls of the nursing home. Journalists wrote about them. People across the world read about their reunion, and many found hope in their resilience. In a world often filled with division and pain, David and Esther reminded everyone that true love does not die. It can survive hatred, war, tragedy, distance, and even the silence of decades. If it is real, it waits. If it is destiny, it finds a way. They had lost a lifetime together, but they had gained the proof that eternal love exists. And they showed the world that when it comes to love, it is never too late. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel, The Day Everything Changed, for more stories that will transform the way you see life.